Morning, everyone. The last hour or so, I guess a couple of hours this morning, has been very focused on the payment and financial services ecosystem. So to the next session, we're going to kind of double down on some of the themes that you've heard, but also touch on an adjacent industry that I think a couple of our previous speakers mentioned, which is healthcare. And we've got an expert to help us do that with Zayna, and many of you will already know Dave. So hopefully we've got the next half hour before you and your lunch, and we hope to kind of touch on some pretty important insights. We know that trust is an essential element to society. It unifies our families, our communities, and the way we're governed. And I wish I had counted the number of times trust was mentioned already this morning. We know it's a core element to the success of any product or business, and Sasha even mentioned it's a key differentiator. And the last few years of the pandemic has accelerated our reliance on technology, and it's really brought the notion and the need for trust in digital engagement to the forefront. And so the term of trust has actually kind of reached new heights in the notion of how important it is for how we think about our engagement across the ecosystem and the future. It's become a critical factor in ensuring not just the success of our collective industries, but actually in the success and the prosperity and the future of Canada. So I'm thrilled to welcome my colleagues. Zayna, as I mentioned, is going to bring some insights from the healthcare industry. She's a leader in the future of health. In fact, she was recently recognized as one of the top 10 women shaping the digital healthcare landscape in Canada. She's held numerous strategic leadership roles and has recently joined Deloitte as their in-house health futurist, which sounds like a very cool role. Zayna also teaches health sector strategy at the Rotman School of Management. And many of you will already know Dave. So Dave Birch is known for helping to make sense of digital money and digital identity as we embrace technology and think about the future. He's an advisor, a regular contributor to Forbes and Financial World, and is the author of a number of amazing books, including The Currency Cold War and my personal favorite, Identity is the New Money. Dave will be on stage later today to share his thoughts on the metaverse, I believe. So the backdrop here, you'll see there's three principles that I believe are core to thinking about any digital endeavor. It needs to be authentic, it needs to be inclusive, and it needs to be relevant. And when you think about those core principles, the intersections bring a number of other things for us to consider. When you see the intersection of authenticity and inclusivity, you start to think about opportunity to create ideas and content. When you start to think about the intersection of inclusivity and relevance, then that's actually all about access. And authenticity and authentic engagement and relevancy actually are core elements to bring what Saba was just talking about, and I think it's been mentioned already in a number of panels this morning, which is about giving the end user control of their data. So, panelists, when you think about that as a backdrop, couple of questions. So the first one is, how does that resonate, and is it relevant to the way that you look at the market challenges and opportunities? So Zayna, let's start with you.
Yeah, so maybe let's sort of think about in healthcare. First of all, you should all be perking up for three reasons. One, there's a lot I think you can learn from the journey healthcare is going through to your world. Not much, but a little bit. The second is you're all paying for our healthcare system to the tune of $210 billion of your collective taxes, and it's in very big trouble. And so we should care because 30 to 40% of that is completely inefficient because we've been analog for 150 years and we're finally entering digital. And 3, your sector is going to save us. There is no way the solutions we need in healthcare are going to come from within the sector. I teach a health MBA course where the major assignment is I give them Interac, Shopify, Wealthsimple, TD Bank, and I ask them to design a go-to-market strategy for them to save healthcare on data. So all those 3 reasons is just some context. So our 3 words that we use, if you think of in healthcare, when you're outsourcing your agency to somebody else for your own body, is definitely authenticity. But our other 2 words is transparency, because it's got to be evidence-based, and benevolence, this intention of doing good. You're in this transaction for good. And so similar but different, and I may just unpack, though, these 3 words for healthcare. I think, in authenticity, we are now going from a fully analog to slowly digital world. And, in the physical world, you know your cues. You see the lab coat, you see the stethoscope, you hear the buzz at the hospital, you know it's authentic. So what is going to recreate that authenticity in a digital world has not been figured out. So I think that's a job to be done there to convey that. On inclusivity, I think the issues are the same. I would add an extra pressure in our world. 70% of the users of healthcare services are older adults. So there's a whole digital literacy, digital determinants of health. So if you're going to have MFA for an 85-year-old person in northern Alberta, they don't even have internet, they can't afford Wi-Fi, they might not have a phone, they might not have the haptics, the literacy, the eyesight, the ears. All those things don't work for many rural elderly users. And so, and equity is becoming a core requirement for publicly delivered health services. So that's going to cause an inequity. So that's got to be solved for. And then finally, relevance. On the one hand, our healthcare is so sacred in Canada, probably more sacred than our financial data. And so, unlike, when you get fraud and something goes wrong, there's a recourse. The liability agent will pay you back whatever you've lost. There is no recourse once your health data got out, right? You can't be made whole. And so because of that, and because healthcare is so risk averse already, what we try to do when we solve for the digital world of healthcare on relevance is we don't try to mitigate risk or manage risk. We just exclude risk. We find the edgiest of the edge case, and then we take every possibility. So just to give you an example, to access your lab data today, if you did blood work, it's like 7 questions of everything of your childhood, like what was your grade 6 friend's blood type? Like no one's going to remember that. And so we make it impossible for us to access because we exclude risk. So all those is substrate for you to help problem solve for us.
Well, I love Sasha's point earlier about intelligent experiences. So I think just to add to that, it's got to be easy, right? It's got to be safe, secure, relevant, and easy. Dave.
I'll tell you a true story. Because of what she said there, I just have to tell you a true story. So I should say, by the way, I forgot to tell you, these are mostly from banks. You might have to explain that benevolence thing in a little bit more detail, but we'll come back to that later on.
My husband works for one of the banks in this room.
So it's an absolutely true story. So an acquaintance of mine, a person I know personally, because I want to make this point about the embedding of this trust, right? So a friend went on holiday I won't say the country, they went on holiday to a Middle Eastern country to go scuba diving. And when they got there, they got really sick, as often happens the first time you go to one of these places, if you drink the water, So after like a whole day in bed, they couldn't leave their hotel room. They were it's not for lunch, this discussion normally, but the point is they couldn't leave their hotel room for reasons we don't really need to go into at this point. So on the second day, this is ruining the holiday, we can't leave the room. They call down to the hotel desk and call for some help, right? And so the guy turns up. And generally the treatment for this kind of malady is they basically give you a drip, which is essentially, all it is sugar and salt, basically. But anyway, so they get hooked up to the drip, and, it takes a day to rehydrate and get better, but they do get better, and so they manage to enjoy the last 2 days of their scuba holiday, right? So when they get back to the UK, they claim for the medical bill with their insurance company, and the insurance company refuses to pay the bill on the grounds that the person that treated them wasn't a doctor. It was just some guy from the hotel. So just because you said, well, there's the white coat and the stethoscope. No, that's not. This is why fraud is completely out of control. Yeah. because we don't have the embedded, you don't sell cars to people and give them, oh, you know, you might want a seat belt, and do you want a 2.3 belt or a seat, do you want a 3? It doesn't work like this. Like, we don't have any trust. And the things that used to work for us with our sort of, I don't know, our Cro-Magnon village mentality, oh, he's got a white coat on, so therefore it must be a doctor. No. The solution was mentioned earlier on. We have to have some kind of embedding of this trust. We need technological infrastructure. So all of Debbie's points are absolutely correct, but you can't expect people to think about these individually at every point in their lives. There's a phrase I absolutely love, which is applied, you know, the cryptocurrency people go on about how, you know, you should be your own bank, which is as nonsensical as saying people should be in charge of their own data, but we'll come back to that in a moment. So people say, oh, you should be, it's the stupidest thing I ever, you be your own bank. That's completely. And I saw a phrase, I'm embarrassed now because I've gone blank on the guy's name. The guy said, if you want to do that, it requires persistent competence. And I'm a normal person. I don't have persistent competence, and I doubt anybody in this room does too. So we have to have these things, but we have to have them as part of the infrastructure. Right. Consumers, if consumers have to do something to make any of this happen, I just don't see it. And by the way, I'm English, so my nightmare isn't about doctors in white coats, it's about pretend dentists. It's true. We have a serious, look, you can Google it. It's a terrible, anyway. Bulgarian plumbers who turn up and with a fake dentist certificate and start drilling holes in people's, this happens, you know, this isn't a fevered night. Anyway, so I agree with you. That it should be part of the infrastructure, right? So, sorry.
So you all thought you were coming to a payments conference, didn't you?
Oh yeah, that's right. So
there's pain.
There is pain. So listen, like, the notion of trust here, we've all agreed, is super, super important. And Canadians expect to be able to trust the entities, the organizations that they believe they're engaging with. And Grant mentioned a little earlier about, you know, the opportunities and challenges of AI. It's actually right across the kind of digital spectrum. So we don't need to have to wait for GPT to be part of our day-to-day fabric. Our challenges in trusting how we engage online and digitally is there today. So in a recent survey that we conducted in Interac, Canadians believe organizations are primarily responsible for protecting their customers' data. And nearly 7 in 10 of Canadians in that survey would hold organizations accountable in the event of a breach or data loss. So, you know, we've got some challenges and some opportunities, but where do we think trust is going? And you touched on some areas of, you know, the need for some big digital changes, but in the healthcare industry, where is it going, Zayna?
So we think of 2 areas, and again, for you solution developers, please, this should perk up some business ideas. So one area for sure for us is the convergence of all these point solutions that are access points. So you guys might remember when we entered the e-commerce era, everyone needed to have a website. Well, the new thing for healthcare is a portal. So UHN Hospital, your doctor's office, a portal for you to go get your data. Annette McKinnon is a patient in Canada with very complex rheumatoid arthritis. She has 13 different patient portals, 13 user IDs, 13 passwords, none of them talk. So it doesn't mean we have to integrate healthcare in the backbone. That's not in the cards, I think, for Canada ever, but an experience layer has got to be created because it's just not going to work for patients. So that's one. And then the second is just, and I think Saba mentioned it, just access to data. So in the EU, all 30 or 29, sorry, Britain, you're now out, countries.
We were trying to remember earlier, how many countries are there in the EU? And both of us said, don't ask us.
So have a look. They've just put through the big six policies, pan-EU for every member state around health data, around every member of the EU must access their health data. It's got to be portal if you're in Hungary or whatever. That is creating a digital marketplace for any vendor to participate in. We have nothing like that in Canada. We have 13 independent healthcare systems, and even in their own, they don't do that. And so, you know, credentials to enable people to access their data, The idea of a digital health card, some provinces are working on as the authentication tool. Maybe it's that, maybe it's not. But the big reason isn't that you said nobody wants to be what we call the CMIO of their data, the Chief Medical Information Officer.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Just like you don't want to be the CFO of all your financial. We don't want that, right? It's too complicated. So it's more to keep out people from interrogating our data and being able to have a way to grant access to different parties, so that example we just heard of, the mother who had the ER need in another country while on vacation, that as the son, she can give me access when I need it. Those are the two things. So, experience layer and access point.
Well, I think this wallet point comes into it, right? Because the interaction point then becomes and I am a big fan of the sort of smart wallet version of this rather than the super app. So what I mean by a super app is something that shares identity across different services, which I think is a bad idea. But a smart wallet, which shares strong authentication across multiple services, I think is a very good idea. So the idea that my wallet would contain these credentials, but I don't have to, I go and log into something, I go and tap something, I go to something with my phone, and the hospital, the billing system, the whatever, asks for certain credentials. And those credentials are taken by my wallet and provided, where relevant to the relevant. And also remember, these wallets are smart wallets. So my dumb wallet, like you asked to see my driving license, my wallet is stupid. It doesn't know who I'm showing the driving license to. That's not true of a smart wallet. A smart wallet knows whether the hospital is allowed to look at this particular credential or whether it should be shared. So that infrastructure, the word I like to use for it is the ceremony around it, needs to be absolutely standardized so that consumers know when they're dealing with somebody who's authorized, who's authentic, who's relevant. They mustn't have to do anything. It's just like, if somebody asks me for it and my wallet won't give it to them, that's because they're not allowed to have it. I shouldn't have to think about it any more than that. So I think if we, by which I mean payments people, can drive that kind of wallet structure in the right open banking structure, with the right digital trust framework, with the right digital identity, it isn't just healthcare that's going to be able to make use of that. I think a lot of other sectors are going to want to make use of it too.
Yeah, and I'll just to build on that, again, I feel like we're now on a path, just like unlimited portals, we're going to unlimited digital wallets for healthcare, and I wish we could leapfrog straight to the smart wallet. That would be a dream. Yeah. And just one other thing, again, because I'm counting on you all to come help us in healthcare, the word identity has a really, really bad tone in healthcare. It creates a feeling of surveillance, of, kind of like if somebody gets your credit risk score, like that they're going to get all your health data. So the language that we're using more is verification, credentialing. So when we see, Interac verification services or verified by Visa, you feel a comfort. So just so you know, that's just one thing that the word identity is a little bit banned in healthcare.
Yeah, the sentiment across various industries around the sensitivities around identity is real, right? So yes, we have to be not just sensitive, but relevant to the market needs.
Okay, I won't mention it again then.
No, you go ahead.
I won't mention identity again.
So it seems like we're globally experiencing a bit of a trust crisis. Right? You only have to look at social media to see the disinformation, the misinformation. There's obviously a need for education. And, there is negative sentiment out there. So what do we need to do when we think about there's clearly huge opportunities? Opportunities not just in financial services and payments, but in healthcare, in transportation, in education, in many different industries. What do you think we need to do to move forward when we think about some of these challenges? Dave?
I think we should look at, healthcare is clearly one of the areas where, and as you point out, misinformation in payments means that, I bought Dogecoin instead of Bitcoin or something. Who cares, basically? But misinformation in healthcare is a little more concerning. So I call
it dodgy coin, not
Dogecoin. So I completely take that on board. But I think one of the other sectors we can learn from as well is actually, and it's in my head because I've just finished some work for a thing in the UK called the DDRC, the Defence Data Research Council. So one of the things the defence people are really, really worried about is because it's the same thing, because misinformation becomes weaponized. And it becomes a serious attack on critical national infrastructure. So it's the same kind of thing, like the problems that we're trying to solve, your authenticity problem. I mean, we can talk about it kind of like academically, and but it's about to become a tsunami. Like the misinformation is just going to start washing over us. I mean, I felt sorry for the FedNow guy, because the FedNow guy gave a terrific presentation. We're all looking forward to FedNow. FedNow is great. Meanwhile, Robert Kennedy, who has 200 billion trillion followers, says that FedNow is going to, I don't know what it was, they're going to use alien technology from Area 51 to quantum teleport money from vaccinated people or something. I don't remember the exact but you know what I mean? Like, what are you going to do about that? There's nothing you can do about it. So unless that authenticity is part of the infrastructure, if I see a picture of Winston Churchill playing table tennis with Mao Zedong or something like that, I need a red border around it if there's no digital signature, if there's no authenticity, and I need a green border around it if there is.
You're not suggesting a blue verification mark by any
It's a blue tick.
Right. Little tick.
But you know what I mean? It's got to get to that level, and you know, if we can do something to start building part of that infrastructure, I don't think, I mean, maybe you're going to tell me I'm wrong, but I don't think we want a separate infrastructure for payments, for health, for Internet of Things. What we want is a working digital identity infrastructure which can deliver that authenticity.
Isn't that how Estonia works? Isn't it one for everything? Postal?
Yeah, I don't want that either, because I'm
sorry.
And no, and I'm not a Robert Kennedy, but do you really want one identifier for everything? That sounds a little un-Canadian to me as well. So
all right.
It's all, you know.
Yeah.
I think that
we want a federate. I don't want to tell you, but you know what we need. But
well, I think what we need is something that works the same way every way, that makes sense to people, is easy to use, and does actually check all the security boxes and is relevant to the user. Nobody wants multiple portals. So not only do we have to think about solving these problems in our own sector, but when it comes to authentication and trust, it actually has to play now, through the intricacy of technology enabling that, hopefully, intelligent experience, right? So it's got to play out across.
So let me just add more healthcare context to this. Again, I'm looking for the problem solvers. Now, this is where brain guts will start to spew all over the hall when I start to give, this is when your mind gets blown, is what I mean by that. So one, anyone want to guess a child born today when they're going to die on average? At this point, 150 years.
What?
Yeah, 150 years, okay? So think about all that lifetime, past 65 when you're supposed to retire, of all the interactions and exchanges you're going to have with healthcare as your body starts to decay and all that stuff. So that's one. Two, a third of all the data in the world right now is healthcare data. Only 3% of that is used and accessed. This whole 97%, we can't even touch. It's locked in prisons, et cetera. In Canada, legally, the only way, Saba, in your example, you could get that clinic to go get your data is through this amazing technology that sits in museums called the fax machine. By law. I think there's a whole conspiracy that we're keeping that industry alive. But anyway, and so that's our starting point. So just given that and all other things, two big issues just in terms of where we go forward. So one is we need in healthcare an anchor institution for all the reasons we talked about, because there's going to be all the digital wallets that are going to be created are mostly going to be little startups. They're going to, because the incumbents ain't going to do this, and we're not going to trust all these proliferous brands. And so I think there's a chance to leverage the anchor institutions that us Canadians still trust. And even though David isn't the most enamored, it is our banks. We love our oligopolies. Of course, government, we trust them. We trust the Ministry of Transport to take care of our license, even if we don't trust politicians. So we definitely should leverage some kind of anchor institutions that is that layer. The second thing that is the big one for us, and I'd love to see the parallel, is much clear transparency about what standards are going to be used to kind of create all these. So I'll just finish the point, and then you can pile on, Dave. One is just a lot of people are going to be inherently skeptical. So just to eliminate conspiracy theories, because after the vaccine and that Bill Gates put like little nanobots in our bodies, like there's a whole new population that mistrusts everything, and if this thing comes to healthcare, so transparency will be clear, work in the open, how is it going to be governed, and so, you mentioned misinformation. It's probably going to be really hard to remove misinformation. Like there's this doctor called Oz that actually has a TV show that peddles snake oil, and he's a doctor, but we can label truth. And I think an anchor institution plus transparency will go a long way. So that's what I see as what's next. What do you think, David?
I think the transparency point's really interesting, Zayna, because I think one area where our industry is making some progress, a little bit slow, is we have a new toolkit that we didn't have a few years ago. We have things like verifiable credentials, zero-knowledge proofs, homomorphic encryption, cryptographic blinding. We have a whole set of technologies we didn't have before. So this idea that you can share data without giving it away is and obviously if you're a, I was going to say if you're a politician, I don't want to sound abusive, but I mean the point is if you don't grow up with these sort of technologies, that probably sounds a bit weird that I can share information with you without actually giving you the information. But this is somewhere we can contribute, and I also think it needs the governance structures that go with it. And one area which I think could work, when we've discussed this in the Canadian example, in the UK, there's a lot of work going on at the moment around this concept of data trusts and the idea of using essentially trust law so your data is pooled for the benefit of other people. It's not given away, and the trustees. And so this idea of marrying up the kind of technologies we're playing with, like verifiable credentials, with these new governance structures like data trusts, I think does actually provide some optimism that we didn't have before. So I'm not being negative about. I just think everything's completely messed up at the moment, and fraud is utterly out of control, and no one knows anything's true.
Part of why the UK is creating these data trusts, and they're a leader in the world, is they're actually creating a new health economy off data, right? So data is the new oil, whatever you want to call it. Canada doesn't have a lot of places to look to build the next economy to drive our job growth and wealth creation in this country. Like, we're kind of trying in the tech economy and failing. So in the UK, they are trying to say, can we create new wealth for the country off new use cases and value pools off of this incredible data set you sit on for the population? So it starts to marry into a whole new set of opportunities beyond just, the value of liberating that frickin' data so others can interrogate it. So that's just part of what's going on there. And I think these tools will help a lot.
That extension of open finance into open data, if you look at the academic work that's being done on that at the moment, it's not marginal. So I mean, one of the reasons why the UK is so enthusiastic about it is because you're not talking about like 0.1% change to GDP. You're talking about 3 to 4% just by having the open data without anything else that goes with it. So I agree with you. These are really significant changes. What I'm being enthusiastic about is that there are people in this room that are playing with the technologies that could actually provide some practical infrastructure for that, which wasn't true a few years ago. So,
and I think, one of the themes that I hope we're going to leave you with here is that this is all connected, right? So the work that's being done and has been done in the financial services space around tokenization, around having the ability to manage the risk, structure the governance, applies as we kind of connect the dots across all kinds of industries. So you've got a captive audience here, Zayna, to help on the healthcare sector, and we can apply that to lots of other industries. But unfortunately, we're coming to the end of our chat because lunch is waiting. But we've only really touched on the surface of the importance of those three themes of authenticity, relevance, and inclusivity. And it's been a fantastic discussion. Thank you, Tracy and the Payments Canada team for putting on, how nice is it that we're all together, face to face? Like, round of applause for that, for sure. So I'd urge you, as you go off to enjoy the rest of the summit and have your lunch, continue the conversation around trust and how we can bring this to life with the great technology that we have in Canada to be able to do that. So a round of applause for Zayna and Dave. Thank you.
Thank you.